Hello, everyone. Here we are for part 3 of our journey, Dive in Search of Pearls, an introduction to the writings of St. Maximilian Kolbe. We started with this image in approaching the writings of St. Maximilian, diving in search of pearls. And therefore, we started off saying that what we need is to find a diving tour. Also, we need to be good swimmers if we want to launch on this adventure. And the third part was to wear the proper attire. But finally, today we are ready to dive in, to take a dive. In other words, after having become familiar, more probably familiar with the story of St. Maximilian Kolbe, with his life, the background, the historical and the cultural background in which he lived, worked, and wrote, we have also had the opportunity through the homework, the text suggested from the writings, the introduction to the writings themselves, to get some clues about the spiritual and human development of Maximilian Kolbe. We are now ready to approach his writings directly. We have discovered that he left behind letters, a large body of correspondence, also personal journals and personal notes that he took during retreats or during his travels. He left behind articles, and therefore now we are exactly ready to dive in, to explore, enjoy, and discover pearls, a great variety of pearls. And I warn you, there will be pearls of many different sizes and shapes. And according to each one's inclination, interest, and even inspiration, we might be able to discover very different things. I would suggest to keep in mind that spiritual attitude that St. Maximilian himself had suggested, and that I pointed out in the very first session when I concluded with the reading from writing 1306, titled How to Read, where Maximilian Kolbe suggests to approach any reading about Our Lady with this attitude of faith and prayer, asking for the Holy Spirit's guidance in coming to meet the person of Our Lady herself. And as back then, today, again, I remind myself and everyone that even in approaching the writings of St. Maximilian, will be wise to have this attitude of faith, because it's a spiritual exercise, an exercise led by the Holy Spirit. And therefore, we are not just reading a book, a novel. We are encountering a saint, a person who has been shaped by the Holy Spirit. And therefore, in his life, in his writings, we are in search for pearls. Now, there might be several different approaches that we could use in reading the writings, and I am going to suggest a few, and you may even consider others, but here are a few that you might want to consider for yourselves. You may dive in a chronological way. What I mean is you, for example, may choose to read the letters, the journal entry, and the articles that he wrote in a given period of time. So you see how he, in those years, in the location where he was stationed, he would write and take little notes in his journal or write articles. And therefore, this way you could allow the Holy Spirit to show you the spiritual development of Maximilian, of his thought, his spirituality, the insights that were given to him. And I suggest that you could let yourself be surprised by what you discover. Another approach, equally valuable, is that to approach one section at a time. We have come to know that in the two set volumes, we have letters, personal notes, journal entry, articles, published and unpublished, the drafts for a book. Now you can choose, for example, to take one section at a time and read them in sequence. And again, always though, keeping in mind the chronology of his life, what was happening in his life in that period as you read whatever, the letters or the articles or the journal notes. So it's not, you don't read them out of context, in other words, but also it can give you an insight why is he addressing this subject matter right now. Another approach, a third approach that you might want to consider is to take advantage of the broad subject index that is provided in the second volume of the writings of St. Maximilian Kolbe. You may choose, for example, to read what he wrote about the mediation, Our Lady Mediatrix of all graces, for example. And in the index, you will find many indication by number of the writings where in a direct way or indirect way or in a more expanded way, he spoke about that topic. So this could also be an approach. Finally, you might also want to just read them randomly. I am familiar with people that do so, for example, with the Diary of Saint Faustina, with the Bible itself, or with the autobiography of Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. You could also open the writings and see what is presented before you on that given day. Regardless, though, whichever approach you choose to take in reading the text, I suggest that you may again keep in mind that is not a casual reading. Again, we are not reading a novel. We want to dive in. So we don't want to do a superficial reading of his text and therefore just perhaps get stuck in details or overlook instead things that can be an inspiration and insight. Therefore, for example, you may want to read them, to read his writings, keeping in mind several different perspectives. For example, you can approach his writings from a spiritual perspective, trying to see the spiritual development of his spirituality, to see the mystical and ascetical growth that from the 20 years old young friars comes to the 47. As you know, as we said earlier, most of his writings cover only 27 years of his life. He didn't leave behind anything from before the time when he was a seminarian studying. We don't have letters from his childhood and so forth, but still this is a treasury for us to discover the spiritual development of this giant, this saint and martyr, mystic saint, a man of great spiritual insight. Another approach could also be that of trying to catch the theological insights. We said earlier that St. Maximilian was not a theologian by profession, but because he was rather a missionary and a mystic. But still, in his writings, we can detect many theological insights that, in fact, theologians, even to this day, keep digging into because they are truly beautiful, powerful insights that could be further developed, especially in reference to Our Lady and her relationship with the Holy Trinity, the Holy Spirit in particular. So that is another approach that you can have, whether reading his letters, his personal journal, his articles, and so forth. And if we are careful, we might discover some of this precious pearls anywhere. Not only in articles that were or texts that were meant to be more catechetical and thought through, but sometimes in journal entries where he was writing, for example, on a boat, in a train, and he was just putting on paper something that was coming to him. Thirdly, you could also approach his writings thinking of how they speak to us of his way of relating to people, his relationships with his family members, with his confreres, the Franciscans, with members of the Militia de Immaculata, occasional readers of the magazine, authorities, whether civil authorities or church authorities. And you can see how he was really relating to every person with great respect and the truthfulness. With sometimes he will enjoy the wit and even humor that he displays in writing to some of his closest friends. You will see how detailed he was in explaining things. I don't want to give everything away, but that could be another beautiful approach to discover how Maximilian treasured and developed relationships, friendships, and the relationship in different ways. Finally, you might want to enjoy discovering the apostolic vision and strategy that transpires from his writings. The letters that, as we pointed out earlier, were not written necessarily for publication, but that leave for us so many beautiful pages where he opens up his heart to the missionary apostolic vision that he is in front of him, and the strategies that he thinks to employ to achieve the winning for Christ through the Immaculata, all souls everywhere. Now, another aspect that you might truly enjoy discovering in the writings is St. Maximilian leadership. He was definitely a great leader. He had exceptional leadership skills, a leadership style that was unique and that was engaging and that was bringing people to want to participate in the mission together and work together. And he had also great organizational skills. And as you read, you might discover all this in practice as he was writing or expanding, sharing his vision, his thought. Many times he talks about himself as not being a good manager or leader or superior, but you will be surprised how probably that was he was underestimating his talents. As you can see, we may dive in a variety of ways according to our own interest, inspiration, and perhaps you may find yourself wanting to read the same text from these very different perspectives. The same pages, the same set of letters, for example, could be read from a spiritual perspective, to see the spiritual insights development, or from an apostolic perspective, or could be read trying to detect his relational approach or his leadership style, and so forth. So this time I thought I wouldn't burden you with a lot of extra reading, but the homework for this third session is simply this: to devote each day 10 to 15 minutes, unless you really get into it and you come to want to dedicate more time each day to reading the writings, discerning and choosing the approach that you prefer, whether the chronological manner, or taking a session, or reading them randomly, or using the subject index. You might first experiment and see what you are drawn to, but then make a commitment to really take the time each day, 10, 15 minutes or more, according to what is possible for you or you are led to do. And also, I would suggest that perhaps you may want to keep a little diary, a little journal, where you note down the pearls that you discover as you read. You know, as I said at the beginning, this is a spiritual exercise led by the Holy Spirit, who will be revealing to each of us in different ways according to where we are at in our spiritual journey of faith, or at this particular time in our life. He will reveal to us different pearls that might be an inspiration for us, and might be wise to write them down so as not to lose sight or to think about them again, and so forth. As you discover them, you perhaps will be surprised by what you discover. I suggest go in with no preconceived ideas. Just let yourself be surprised by what the Holy Spirit, Our Lady, Saint Maximilian will reveal to you. That proved to me very fruitful, a very fruitful experience. Next time we'll go a little farther, and therefore I wish you a wonderful month, and until February, God bless you and enjoy this experience with St. Maximilian Kolbe's writings. God bless you all. Finally, I wanted also to suggest in the website of the Militia de Immaculata, militiaoftheimmaculata.com, in the menu, under the section Kolbe, you will find the whole page titled 2001 Kolbe International Congress. In 2001, over 20 years ago, scholars from all different kinds of discipline came together in Rome, invited by the FKMI International Center, to present what they had discovered in the writings of St. Maximilian Kolbe from their own unique perspective. Of course, they were scholars, theologians of different, dealing with different topics, but you will be surprised how much they discovered. Some of them were dogmatic theologians, some were spiritual theologians, or and so forth. And you will see that each of them read the writings from their own perspective and found treasures. That might be not necessarily as a homework, but something that is available for you at any time to read. Keep in mind that back then, in 2001, the writings of St. Maximilian had not yet been translated in English, and the translation provided was made by professional translators, but there might be some discrepancies, but still might be an enjoyable additional read in time whenever you want to pick them up. God bless you and have a wonderful month.